Welcome back. Really privileged to welcome Brandon Tseng here as our speaker. He's the Chile's co-founder, president, and chief growth officer, along with his brother, founded the company. Served in the Navy. Who are Navy folks? Correct.
Woo!
7 years as SEAL and Surface Warfare Officer. Was on board the USS Pearl Harbor. And again, in 2015, he founded Shield AI along with his brother. I love the mission. It's to protect service members and civilians with intelligent systems, which is awesome. And it's building the world's first, or world's best AI pilot, which I think you'll hear more from Brandon on. We call him like one of the prime slayers, along with Andrew and a few others, actually getting out there and getting contracts and being competitive in a system which is really difficult to break into. And it's just encouraging to see folks like Brandon's company go toe-to-toe and succeed. Earned his Bachelor of Science Mechanical Engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy. That's like the second oldest military academy, I think, right? Oh. What's the oldest one? Anyone
it's Mike.
No. A little inter-service rivalry as a West Pointer, and I guess some West Pointers here. Also MBA from the Stanford of the East, also known as Harvard Business School. And little known fact, his two daughters are named after weapon systems.
My daughter and my son.
Yeah. Oh, son. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
Which is pretty cool. One, Charlie, which anyone heard of the Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle system, 84 millimeter, Swedish, does all sorts of cool stuff. I actually was the test platoon for that a million years ago when I was a Ranger platoon leader. Amazing weapon system. So Charlie's named after that. Where's Charlie's? That's a nickname for the weapon.
So the British call it the Charlie G.
Okay.
So we call it the Carl G in America. They call it the Charlie G.
I'm sure both Charlie's an amazing person, I'm sure. And Winchester. Okay, so you heard Winchester rifles, but any Air Force people out there? Anyone called in air support before? I have. It's when you expend all your ammunition, the pilot says, "I'm Winchester," and it usually heads back to the 5-star hotel and the bar. And you're out there in the field going, "Damn!" But anyway, it's pretty cool names for your kids, Brandon. What I really like about Brandon, he's one among a very few founders that I think is inspired by his real world experiences, being out there deployed to Afghanistan and other places in harm's way, where you really it's a visceral experience when you witness a need for a technology and a capability, because you see the stakes, you see the impact, in the human cost of not having that technology or capability. So I think that was what let's go out and make money and save our kids' college. But I think having that experience where you see that we need this and we need it now, and let's get after it, make it happen. I think Brandon's one of those that select few founders who knows what it's like from firsthand field experience to need that technology. So Brandon, thanks for coming with us and sharing your stories, and thanks Ernestine for giving the conversation up.
Awesome. Brandon, high expectations for your kids, but why don't we start by talking a little bit more about your upbringing, what inspired you to go into service and become a Navy SEAL?
Yeah, absolutely. And you all might laugh at this once I get to it. But first and foremost, I am a sucker for inspiration. And I try to find inspiration in lots of different aspects of life. And so the thing that was the spark that led to my journey where I eventually became a Navy SEAL, 2 movies, favorite movies of all time, The Rock and Under Siege, great movies in the 90s. One is about Steven Seagal, who's a Navy SEAL. It's like the plot is Die Hard on a battleship. And then The Rock is another fantastic movie with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. And unfortunately, the SEALs don't do well in that movie, but that's okay. It's just a movie. So those were the sparks. And then, learn more about it. Asked my parents, who were very supportive, right, to a 10-year-old boy who's like, "Mom, Dad, I want to be a Navy SEAL." They said, "Yeah, sure. That sounds like, fun. This phase will pass. And you should read books on it," because my mom wanted me to read a lot. And so would get my hands on books. I would read the books. Fast forward to when I was a sophomore in high school. I was like, "Mom, Dad, still want to be a Navy SEAL. How can I do that?" They said, "Well, you should go to college." I said, "That makes sense." And also spoke with, we just happened to have one of my little brother's friends' dad was a Vietnam SEAL. I asked him, how do you become a Navy SEAL? And he said, "Well, you should become an officer. And I said, why? He's like, they make more money, which is the worst reason in the world to do anything. And I can't, that's like poor advice. But I was like, that checked out to, sophomore high school, and went to a summer program at the Naval Academy, found a lot of inspiration there, was inspired, similar, beautiful campus, great engineering program, thought the uniforms looked cool. And so that was kind of the next source of inspiration. And then even while at the Naval Academy, in actually seeing the upperclassmen, and seeing the leaders there, you actually learn, what service really means. And then it was, okay, well, how do you, fast forward 3-4 years there, how do you actually want to serve your country? Because there are so many different ways to serve the country. And still wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Didn't get it right out of the Naval Academy, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. But look, that's kind of at the end of the day, it was how can I best serve my country? And that became what started as this looks really amazing, Hollywood movies, became what does service really mean? And it was inspired about this idea of service and, what is the best way for me as an individual to serve my country? And that is what led to me wanting to become a Navy SEAL.
You were certainly an ambitious 10-year-old. I think I wanted to be a magician at age 10. So some of us want to be SEALs, others want to be magicians. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about the founding story of Shield AI 2015? What inspired you to start the company?
Yep. And again, it's really these stories of inspiration and being a sucker for inspiration. So first and foremost, I would point to my dad and my older brother. My dad was an immigrant to the United States. His family, actually, when the communists took over China after World War II, my dad and my grandparents, they fled communist China. They were landowners. They lost everything, and so started over from scratch and helped establish the Taiwanese government and diplomatic relations with South America. And so my dad grew up in South America and then went to college in the United States, and spent most of his time in, corporate America, actually started his career at Bechtel, which I understand there is a building on Stanford for Bechtel. But at the age of 50, he decided to buy a small business, and he bought a very, very small engineering construction company. When I say small, right, this is probably like a $350,000 acquisition. And he has been working on that for he still works on it, 6-7 days a week, depending on how he feels. He loves it, which is you can only work that hard if you truly love something. And has been doing that for now 23 years and will not stop. And he will, die before he quits working. But I remember thinking, I was like, man, like he's built this into like this really nice small business that is provided for the family. He built a level of wealth for, him and my mom where, he just does it because he loves it now at this stage. But I remember thinking it's like, in Harvard Business School would describe like the business as like we have a term for these businesses like a cash bush. This is like a cash shrub. But it's a nice little, and he finds it insulting when I call it that. It's this really nice business that is provided for our family, paid for, 3 out of 4 college tuitions, not mine, because I hold that tell my parents that you didn't pay for mine. I went to the Naval Academy. I wonder, it's like, man, what if he had just started that business 25 years prior to starting the business at age 50 or 30 years, right? In that time that he could have spent working on that, what could it have become? And great credit to him. That's just like something that was always in my mind, but, he had to deal with the reality of circumstances too. It's like, look, I had to provide for 4 kids, growing up, provide for the family, help out my aunts, my grandparents, my mom's side. And so it was just never in the cards for him. And he didn't want to take that risk while raising a family, not till we got a lot older. So got a lot of inspiration from him. The second person is my older brother, who is now he is the CEO of Shield AI. But he started his entrepreneurial journey right out of undergrad. So he won a small business competition at the University of Florida. He was an electrical engineer. It was on wireless power. Immediately went to MIT Business School right after undergrad, where he decided to, work and start that, make that like senior project where he had won this business competition into a real company, worked on it, sold it in 3 or 4 years to Qualcomm. And it was like, holy smokes, like that is, I have these two role models in my life, my dad and my older brother, who it's like for all the risk that you hear about entrepreneurship and every business fails, it's like, well, they worked incredibly hard. And I've got, two examples of success. And
so it must be easy.
So, I don't know if not easy, but it's like, why not? Was kind of the mentality there. So that was kind of the first example of inspiration. The second thing, so I was leaving the military, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, was going to Harvard Business School because I didn't get accepted into Stanford, was just reading a lot. My brother, Ryan, at the time, he was working on an AI robot to wash dishes. And now when I look at the Tesla humanoid robots or the Figure AI robots, it's like, oh, that was what he's working on. But at the time, I was like, Ryan, that is... like, why are you wasting your energies building a dishwashing robot? The world's got a lot bigger problems. Was talking about the problems that I had experienced. But so he got me on to reading a lot about AI, and I took a lot of inspiration from business leaders during that time. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, right? One of the things, again, sucker for inspiration, Elon talks a lot about, like, if you look at his old interviews, he's like, wanted to focus on three things, right? The internet, space travel, and renewable energy. And you can say like internet, PayPal, X, X.com, X now. You look at, SpaceX, obviously for space travel, and then Tesla and Solar City for renewable energy. I actually throw in Boring Company into space travel too, because I think we're going to be living inside these planets for, tunnel systems in Mars. But, I was like, where is he not working on? And like, what is, he fundamentally framed it as these problems are important for humanity. And I agree with that. And it was like, holy smokes. I have this, these experiences and like national security and global stability are fundamentally important to the human experience. And something that I walk through with all new employees at Shield AI is I go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, starts with food and shelter, right? Then it's safety and security. Then it's loving and belongingness. I forget what the fourth one is. And the fifth one is self-actualization, right? And I tell people, it's like, look, by virtue of being at Shield AI, by virtue for most of them, by being born in the United States of America, we get to focus on layers 3, 4, and 5, right? No matter, by virtue of being at Stanford University, I'm going to get to say, you guys get to focus on 3, 4, and 5. Much of the world does not get to do that. Then you can only focus on layers 3, 4, and 5 if layers 1 and 2 exist. And so again, I was like, layer 1, I was not interested in, food or shelter, but it's like, there's this area here that is fundamentally important for everything else on planet Earth to be achieved. And so I tell people, it's like, look, for advancements in human rights, advancements in technology, advancements in education, advancements in medicine, advancements in space exploration, all these things, you fundamentally have to have security and stability first, right? That is, Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. And so there was this area that I was able to say, you know what, this is an important area for humanity, and it just so happens that I have a lot of experience in this national security, global stability world, and so that was kind of my second source of inspiration was business leaders like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. Read a great, I was inspired by Peter Diamandis' book Bold at the time. And so that was it. And then the third example was actually like my experiences with my teammates. By virtue of being in the SEAL teams, I had the opportunity to speak with a number of Gold Star families. If you're unfamiliar, a Gold Star family is a family that has lost a loved one in service to this country. And found their stories absolutely inspiring. And it's like when I was reflecting on, for GSB, you have to write an essay, what matters most to you and why. And mine it was like, look, outside of my family, what matters most to me and why is like just continuing to have positive impact on the world. And I got to have a lot of great positive impact in the Navy and the SEAL teams. And I wanted to figure out how to have positive impact at scale, outside of the military. And so that's, third source of inspiration. And then I remember thinking, it's like, there are a few things that have brought me to tears in my life. And it's like when I share stories of my time in service, that's like when I actually like get choked up, or like telling stories of other service members' time in service. It's like, damn, that's what I actually care a lot about and has a real emotional pull on me. It's like, that is, great. If it's something I can work on. And like, despite working with the government, which is awfully hard, awfully frustrating, it's like at the end of the day, you're going to fall back on what matters most to you. And it's like, you know what? Having a positive impact, these problems I care deeply about. And so that was kind of the third source of inspiration for, deciding to approach my brother and say, hey, I've got a crazy idea.
That's great. That's really, really inspiring to hear. So as you think about how Shield AI has grown and scaled, and as you founded and scaled the company, what were some pivotal moments that really defined the company's trajectory? Yeah,
there are a number of pivotal moments. I'll try to pick maybe two or three, but like the first one that comes to mind was actually just like our first contract with DIU, and that played a pivotal moment because it led to fundraising. And so, so fun story. In 2015, I'm convincing my brother to do Shield AI with me. He says, hey, sounds like a noble mission. Sounds like a really crappy business idea, but I'll help you understand it's a crappy business idea. Go talk to 100 people. And me being an ignorant, arrogant Navy SEAL, I was like, whatever, this is a waste of time, but I'll do it if this is what it takes to get you on board. That is, I learned very quickly, that's called market discovery. And so I went and talked to 100 people, brought him along for a number of those conversations. And he's like, okay, there might be something here, but it only makes sense if we can find someone who's truly world-class at AI and autonomy. Reached out to his MIT network. The same name kept coming up, our third co-founder, Andrew Ryder. We sent him a LinkedIn message. We flew on a plane. He responded. 3 days later, we were on a plane to Boston, met at a classroom in MIT, talked for hours about what our vision was for the company, what our mission would be, what our values were going to be for the company. We started the company there. So that was like a pivotal moment, but then go up to raise money, because everybody's like, oh, that sounds like awesome. Sounds like you've got a great founding team. You guys will have Ryan's got a successful exit under him, selling this wireless power company to Qualcomm. You guys will have no problem raising, $5 million. Go up to meet with 30 different venture capitalists. And they say, hey, sounds like a really noble mission, sounds like a crappy business.
Except if you were raising now, everyone
Except if you were raising now.
Throwing money at any NASDAQ idea.
The seed and Series A stage companies now. It wasn't until we got our first contract in 2016 through the Navy, through actually Naval Special Warfare, through Defense Innovation Unit, did we get the traction to raise $2.5 million from venture capitalists. And then I tell entrepreneurs, you earn your right to more capital by doing what you say you are going to do and delivering for your investors. And so, we've now raised over $1 billion in capital, have raised every single year. It's been off to races. But that first contract is super pivotal. That first proof of sale was super important. And it's funny because Defense Innovation Unit was on the verge of not doing it, and you had a customer from Naval Special Warfare said, hey, DIU, you guys, it was DIUX, like, everybody knows you're not going to be around next year anyway, so just give us the money so we can do this project. Fast forward and now look at what DIU has become, and I think it's incredible, right? Very few people believed in that organization also in its early stages, and they've had to go through a lot. The second thing I think about was in 2021, we made 2 acquisitions. We bought a company called Martin UAV. We bought a company called Heron Systems. And that was, a pretty pivotal moment for us. Because just the defense acquisition system, you could say the defense tech ecosystem, it's a very, very hard, they call it the Valley of Death. You could call it like scaled sales. It's very hard to achieve scaled sales if you're not in these really marquee programs of record. I tell everybody, it's like, look, there's actually a path where you don't have to have programs of record, where you can get to like, up to $20 million in, annual revenue, but you would stall out, right? And it's just really hard to get past that. And that's actually like by design of the federal acquisition system, which you've had a lot of, defense large primes lobby for in terms of like what that all looks like. And then there are a variety of different types of programs of record. They're not all created equal. There are great programs of record. There are crappy programs of record. I think a lot of the people are realizing this and understanding this that have been playing in the space. But we had a challenge. We weren't in great programs of record. It was hard to continue to grow, we were trying to partner with primes to actually deploy the technology on their platforms, and it just became evident that we were going to get slow rolled. And so for our stage, we were a Series C company, right? And it was like, hey, we have to fix this problem. And went to the board and, we consolidated it. It's like, all right, well, we're going to fix this problem through acquisition, which is right, in my head, and I give great credit to my brother, right? You grow up seeing all these companies, and the last thing you're like, oh no, acquisition is for extremely late stage companies, or it's for public companies. And we just have to solve this problem through brute force, brute strength. And my brother's like, no, we should, use this lever that we have if we can pull off, it will help solve this problem massively. And I actually love, I think it's Ben Horowitz's quote. He's like, right, this isn't checkers, this is motherfucking chess, it's like there are so many different plays and you just have to figure out which one. And so we made the decision to buy two companies at the same time while concurrently raising a Series D because we had no capital. And that is it's a rare moment in time, like 2021. We're talking here right before, had this happened a year later, it would have been a completely different story. 2 years later, completely different story. And I remember one of our, investors and board members afterwards, he said like, holy crap, like, I can't believe you guys just pulled that off, because in the series of about 4 months, we raised $225 million, bought two companies, and solved some pretty material problems. Not technology problems, not product problems, but really just market problems that existed during that time. And so that was a really pivotal moment.
Yeah. So you've touched upon this a little bit, but maybe you could dive more into what lessons you learned as the company grew from the quadcopter to larger platforms. So many lessons. First and foremost, one of the great, I'll start with like the positive side in terms of like working with a small product with a small customer base, being, Special Operations Command, Naval Special Warfare. It was actually, quote unquote, like the intimacy, that, the two organizations had in terms of bringing this new technology to the battlefield. And it was outside of any bureaucratic constraint. It's like you're getting great user feedback. We're sending our engineers to watch their training, see how they're deploying it. And that is like how you actually build products really, really fast. And that is actually not how the government builds or buys products or technology, right? And you might be surprised by that. It's like, it's very, or maybe not, but it's very bureaucratic. It's very formal, process driven in terms of, when they're building the F-35, they're not talking to every single fighter pilot in the entire market landscape. They've, saying, hey, you know what? There's only going to be 4 fighter pilots that you guys are going to work with for this, and you're not going to get any user feedback from, other people as you're building this program. We have strict requirements. You're going to get built to these requirements. We had no requirements. No requirements dictated from the customer, just the customer describing their problems. And so, look, that's like a very obvious thing to do outside of the defense landscape. And so we were doing it, right? It's like what you see every single other big tech company had done, whether it was like Google or Facebook or Amazon. It's like be customer obsessed, solve their problems for them.
But it is wildly different in the defense space. And to this day, I say, like, look, actually, if you're going to play in this space, you have to do both. Right? You have to actually go through that formal acquisition process. You have to be building towards like requirements if you want to do scale. And that can be challenging and frustrating, but you have to build a relationship with the customer also where you're getting that intimate user feedback and building the products that they want. And you have to find a way to do both at the exact same time, which adds a huge challenge to it. Lots of other lessons. Like I do think about, it's like the lesson of like building programs of record versus buying programs of record, and like that not all programs of record are equal. And it might be really obvious to say now, but in hindsight, like I think about those challenges as it relates to helping your customer base understand software. And how to price software, how to budget for software. Oh no, we can't budget for it because there are no software requirements. These are all like very tactical, like lessons learned over 9 years of doing this.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about just decisions your AI makes versus the human operator, and kind of who decides on the platform or the human making the decisions?
So first and foremost, the human sets the overall intent, right? And there's this lexicon that we use in the military called commander's intent. And that is like, hey, I'm going to give you the overarching mission and you're going to figure out how to do it. And so like, I don't know, your parents, or like, if you're an undergrad, or like you might put this on yourself if you're a grad student, they would be like, my intent for you is to go get A's, and then you got to figure out how to go get A's in all your classes, right? Similar, or for a self-driving car, which is more applicable to like this, what we do, which is essentially self-driving technology for aviation. A self-driving car, you'd say, hey, your mission is to go from point A to point B, and I want you to figure out everything else along the way. And that's what we do, whether it's with a quadcopter that is exploring buildings, and that's the intent, its mission, whether it is an F-16 dogfighting in 1v1, in 2v2, in 2 versus many, in beyond visual range combat. You're setting that overall mission for the user, and the system is figuring out how to execute it in the exact same way a self-driving car is figuring out how to execute its mission. And it's breaking down its mission into different elements, right? In the same way a self-driving car does. It's like, okay, well, now I'm navigating in an urban environment, and there's stoplights and stop signs. There's more restrictive speed limits. I have to be cognizant of bicycles or pedestrians. And then I have to change my behaviors when I am now on a freeway. Our aircraft are doing the exact same thing in terms of like figuring out how to execute the mission. Where the human plays a huge role, in really like 2 parts. One is setting that overall mission intent, but it's also like the course adjustments and where like, I'll call it the behaviors or the tactics have not yet been developed, or you want it to focus. Humans are really, really good at lots of different things that can help systems be more productive, faster in terms of like its execution. And I think about it, actually, it's like I was driving to a wedding from my house, which was 45 minutes away in Annapolis, Maryland, just last week, in my wife's Tesla Model Y. And like Elon had given the full self-driving to everybody for a couple months. So I was like, oh, let me play with this. And I was like letting it play out, but it was just like going too slow in certain areas. So I was like, God dang it. And so like, I'm going to go faster. Like I get what it can do. And so that's when that like human intuition becomes important. And so, our operators, for something like the quadcopter might say, yeah, I know you just mapped out in this entire area, but I see wires that otherwise like would stop me. And I'm going to dictate that you spend some time looking at those wires, because that could be a houseborne IED. That could be, it could be anything, but that's like the number one thing that a human would have intuition for, that, computer vision models didn't exist for IED wires back in 2016, 2017. And then the last part of it is the employment of lethal effects on the battlefield, or just effects on the battlefield. Having been a SEAL, having had to make, the moral decision about the use of lethal force on the battlefield, I fundamentally believe that is a very human thing to do. It is Shield AI's policy that, any time lethal effects be employed on the battlefield, a human is in the loop, on the loop, giving the system the decision to do that. And to be clear, our systems don't actually have those capabilities, but like it's the customers will start, asking, they already have, but like those capabilities will come online when we think about the future of the battlefield. And then like the good news is also, it's like, that's the United States' policy. That's NATO's policy. And then, right, take it for, a grain of salt. It's like even Chairman Xi has said, like, look, he's like, no one wants autonomous killer robots on the battlefield. And so it's like everybody's kind of like stacking hands in that. We'll see, for what's that worth. But, that's the other area that humans play a role on in terms of decision making with AI and autonomy as it relates to the military context.
Yep. So outside the U.S. government, you're working with other nations. How does that experience working with other nations compare to working with DoD?
It varies. It's positive. It's really an interesting space in the world. And normally I would show a couple charts, but I'll talk about the interesting part. So if you had to look at like the level of spend and split it into three different areas, prior to 2001, the U.S. military and our allies, we bought really expensive things: fighter jets, helicopters, aircraft carriers, right? Predator and Reaper drones really didn't exist. And then like things like what we build, which is a 125-pound aircraft, didn't exist, called the VBAT. Other aircraft drones, Scan Eagle didn't exist, Blackjack didn't exist, quadcopters didn't exist prior to 2001. And so everybody spent their money on those things. From 2001 to 2020, the United States and our allies, we learned about drone warfare and like how to fight with, bigger drones and what like Predator and Reaper and MQ-4 Triton meant to the battlefield. And then you had this smaller segment like of, drones coming online that were GPS guided along with our Reaper and Predator, but something like the Scan Eagle is what I think about. You guys can Google that if you don't know what a Scan Eagle looks like. And now, as I think about what the military looks like in 2040, it's like you're actually going to have very, very few helicopters and fighter jets. You're going to have a few more like large drones like a Reaper or Predator, and you're going to have a massive amount, like 10x the amount of smaller drones. Everything from 125-pound VBAT to an air-launched effect to a quadcopter. Just everything it's moving towards this concept of mass. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, it's like mass is a fundamental warfighting concept as old as warfare itself, right? Generally, if you have more things, you do better on, whether it's more people, more weapons, you do better during conflict. And that's, 4,000 years old. And it's not going away anytime soon. And so then it's like, well, how can you apply that mass on the battlefield really matters too, right? And so if I think about, in the Revolutionary War, the British, going against the United States, they couldn't apply their mass as effectively as the United States could maneuver our small amount of mass. And so, which played a material difference in that conflict. And so we're moving towards this world of intelligent, affordable mass that is only made possible by AI and autonomy, because now you can actually precisely maneuver that mass on the battlefield unlike any time in human history. The analogy I make is like when I talk about international countries and why this is kind of exciting. If I look at the compute industry, right? And so, desktop computers, were like our fighter jets and our helicopters, right? In the US, we bought, that would be like the analogy there. Then we moved to laptop computers, and laptop computers were our Reapers and our Predators. And now we have mobile phones, right? And everybody uses a mobile phone. And that is our intelligent, affordable mass. And right, the number of mobile phone compute vastly outnumbers like the number of laptops that are like built and used in the world. And what's really interesting is, right, in the same way mobile computers were adopted by some countries, like skipped desktop and laptops. Like I think about India, I think about Africa, I think about South America. Their entire compute infrastructure is built on mobile computing. They went straight to the answer. International countries are going straight to the answer of intelligent, affordable mass. They're skipping what otherwise, these large, bureaucratic, already built up militaries like the United States have to go through this really painful transformation to figure out how to adopt and work with all of these technologies. These countries are going right to the answer. And what's what is like exciting and challenging and, you know, interesting is that the effect of this is it's bonkers in terms of like how I think about security and stability. Because I tell people, look, a 16-person, you know, SEAL platoon can have the same combat power as a carrier strike group made up of like 6 different ships, 400 aircraft, right? Jet aircraft. And that is a wild amount of power in force projection for a small number of people. The other side of that is like, and so if you extrapolate that, you're talking about countries with, you know, a $20 billion budget can have the same force projection power as the United States does with a $900 billion defense budget. And so when you think about that, it fundamentally challenges a lot of elements as we think about great power in the world, which has just been really concentrated to the United States, our allies, versus, you know, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Mm-hmm. And so I think at least the West has coalesced, and I think we'll have a very strong alliances, you know, and there's a lot of Western values there, and that's important for global stability. But it's like really interesting that small countries can now have incredible outsized impact when you think about AI applied to drones.
Yeah, I mean, like as you talk about intelligent, affordable mass, I think about the effectiveness of electronic warfare against drones in the Ukrainian conflict, for instance. Can you talk a little bit more about how Shield AI is operating in this EW?
Yeah. And so if you guys haven't seen, like, one, there's a lot of noise about like who's winning in Russia or Ukraine, and it's a very challenging situation. And you know, people can debate like why that's important or like should we be sending stuff, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to get into it. One of the things that, you know, Russia employed, call it in the second quarter, if I were to use like a sports terminology, right? First quarter, they advanced, Ukraine pushed them back. Second quarter, they're like, okay, let's adapt. You could call it halftime also. But they started to employ electronic warfare with significant, you know, effectiveness. And why is that important? It's because the predominance of aircraft and missile systems in the world rely on GPS and communications. And this is actually a very deliberate move by China, Russia, Iran in terms of like maneuvering around the United States technological force projection, which is based on air superiority. And you're like, well, how do you establish air superiority? Or how do you counter air superiority? It's like, I can take away what half of their drones and aircraft rely on, which is GPS and communications. And then the other half, which are manned aircraft, crewed aircraft. It's like, well, if I build surface-to-air missiles and proliferate these in radar systems, then they will not be able to have air power on the battlefield. And then you say, why is air power important? It's because it enables troops on the ground to maneuver. And so it becomes like, if you want to know, like the last battle where like air warfare or last war that like air warfare really wasn't a thing. It was World War I, and that became, you know, a very prolonged, awful trench warfare, war of attrition. And so that's why air power is super important when you talk about deterring adversaries and then just, you know, actually like maneuvering on the battlefield. So they've taken away GPS and communications, and that's why you get reports that tens of thousands of drones are being lost every month in Ukraine. And it's why it's like it's like a very, very challenging situation. AI pilots, autonomy, right? Self-driving car technology enables aircraft to maneuver, accomplish missions without GPS, without communications, because it's not built around those technologies. And so it's naturally resilient. It's doing all its compute on the edge. It's doing all its sensing on the edge. It's estimating where it is in the world on the edge, not relying on GPS, but building a map of where it is. And so you have this amazing technology that's a real natural fit for like the number one problem that, you know, national security problem writ large in the world. It's funny because like this idea, I first spoke with my friend in 2015 about, hey, I'm going to build a quadcopter that goes inside buildings completely autonomously. It's going to use self-driving technology. And my friend was a mechanical engineer from the Naval Academy, an F-18 pilot. He said, hey, he was way smarter than me. He's like, we have the exact same problem in naval aviation, and your technology is really interesting because it spans the spectrum of military operations. It helped me understand. He's like, he was flying operations in Syria. It was not really well known. It's like, look, the Russians are jamming GPS and communications, and so therefore our Reapers and Predators don't work, and we can't send them in. And then the second point, I was like, yeah, but why don't they just send you? You know, I've seen Top Gun. You're an F-18 pilot. Why don't you just go in? He's like, well, because they have proliferated these surface-to-air missile systems. I said, well, help me understand how you fare against surface-to-air missile system. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, Brandon, like, yeah, it's like asking me, you know, well, Brandon, how well would you do if you stepped on an IED? It's like, you do not come out of that situation. He's like, so being a fighter pilot is really, really cool until they ask you to go up against the surface-to-air missile system, is what he said. And so you have these technologies that now have been widely recognized as the solution to this problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're a former SOF operator, as we all know. And how has your view of SOCOM changed as you've now worked with SOCOM in a different capacity?
I don't know if it's changed, because I think I had great leaders and mentors, and like, there are great things about SOCOM, and perhaps the number one challenge of SOCOM is like, look, I was getting to work with one of the most elite unit in the entire military, and like what he basically said is like, and what I learned is like, SOCOM is like that scalpel, right? And it's like they can be very surgical, and they can remove like small problems or blemishes or whatever you want to call it, but they can't bring the mass that the rest of the military can bring. And so I think it is one of the challenges that they have, is they're now seen as like the answer to so many challenges, and they can lead, they can, you know, solve lots and lots of problems, and they are really great at solving problems quickly, but they fundamentally lack a lot of the mass, a lot of the budget that the other services bring to the table. And so great first adopter, right? But you need to bring the entire military and our allies along to really have impact in the world.
Yeah. And then I guess on that note, is there anything that the U.S. industrial base should be doing that it's not? And what are we missing as a nation?
Yeah. So first and foremost, like people ask, like, how are we doing against China? And there's like two parts to that. Like, how are we doing against China on a software and AI basis? And then there's like, how are we doing against China on an industrial basis? If you're wondering why I'm saying China, it's because it's the pacing threat. And it's because, you know, as the United States thinks about it, as our senior leaders think about it, right? It's existential for our way of life. And that way of life is what I would describe as like the Western worldview that has been established, the rules-based order that's been established post-World War II, that has allowed billions of people to prosper and, you know, move, yes, for all its challenges, like, but like I would say, actually, I wouldn't say it's like, I think it is a fact that the United States has been to use another Navy term, a global force for good in terms of its impact on the world, even for all of its challenges. And you can ask every single immigrant coming to the United States if that's true, and they would say, yeah, 100%. And so China, as it relates to software and AI, look, the United States is number one. And like, we're ahead. It's hard to say how far ahead, or, you know, like that should not make anybody rest easy, because the problem with being on top is that you have someone who is coming at you full force, trying to figure out how they can usurp your position of being number one, right? It's like, think about, you know, athletics. It's like, oh, you would love nothing more than to dethrone the champions, right? And that is, you know, a cultural mindset. And it means you're hungry and champion, right? It's why it's so hard to win like back-to-back championships. It's because like, oh, we're the best. It's hard to be the best, and you get comfortable around being the best. And like, that should not be how the United States thinks about our software and AI. Just because we're on the best, it means we have to like stay on top in a massive way. As it relates to the industrial base, like, holy crap, China is the best by far. And when I think about China's industrial capacity compared to the United States, they're probably 10x. when I think about China's industrial capacity compared to the rest of the world, they're probably like combined, right? Or the West and our allies, they're probably like 3x, maybe 4x. And so that's a massive gap. We can have smarter, better software systems and more intelligent, but they have a massive production advantage. Things that like make me say, you know what, that can be solved is like the United States industrial base, when mobilized, can solve massive problems quickly, right? And we've done that in World War II. We went from producing 2,000 airplanes per year to producing, 300,000 airplanes by the end of World War II, which was like a 4-year time period. We can mobilize industrial bases. It's hard. The challenge in warfare is, right, there's a set amount of time and you don't want to be playing from behind, right? The goal is actually not to go to war. War is awful in every sense of the imagination. It's to deter that conflict. And so how do you deter conflict? You have to actually have capabilities that your adversary respects and realizes the cost of going to conflict or the cost of invasion is too great. And so the wrong time to mobilize that industrial base is after we've gone to war. Like, it's too late, right? And the cost is way too high at that given time. It's like mobilize ahead so that you can actually deter the conflict. And that's where the United States needs to be moving towards more quickly, is mobilizing an industrial base around that. And you're seeing really nascent efforts with DIU and Replicator, but it's like that needs to be magnified, 100 times over.
So final question, we have a lot of founders in the room here as well. What advice do you have for newer companies looking to work with traditional government contracting versus SBIRs and OTs?
It's a very specific question around contracting. I think, what I'll say is like, the advice that I would give to anybody who wants to be a founder, wants to be an entrepreneur, it's like similar to, it's like similar to wanting to be a Navy SEAL. I think about, and this ties it back to my very opening statements, 10-year-old me looking at these really amazing movies of the Navy SEALs doing the coolest things in the world that look ultra sexy and incredible. What they don't show you is like, it's not a life of glamour. It's a life of suffering and pain, right? And that's the mindset that you have to put yourself in. And I am very thankful that you hear more entrepreneurs talking about that. Jensen Huang, right? NVIDIA, I think he wished all the GSB grads like a life of pain and suffering. I agree with that. It's like Elon Musk talks about how awful it is. And I'm glad people are talking about it because they go in eyes wide open. No matter, like there's a lot of glitz and glamour that is like, I would be careful. It's like, you think of it as like the siren song. It is hard. It is suffering. It is painful. It's meaningful, right? Just like it is in the SEAL teams. That's important. But if you think it's like about, you're doing it for the wrong reasons or you don't know why you're doing it, I think it's important to understand it's going to be 100 times harder than you think. And it's a really easy thing to say. And people say, okay, Brandon, you're saying that, or okay, whatever, Jensen Huang or Elon Musk. It's like the truth. It just matters a lot. So you just have to recognize that going in, realize it's going to be hard, painful, suffering. Ask yourself if that is truly the life that you want, and then be okay with failure, right? And because you're going to fail a lot of times along that journey, you might have catastrophic failure in terms of that journey. And so the way that I've always thought about it is like, look, this is, to the point of having a positive impact, what I've always wanted to do. I love what, like Elon said, it's like such an important problem that even if I fail, like it's at least, it mattered that much, where it's like you have to pursue something. And so I think that's like the right mindset to have as you all are thinking about an entrepreneurial journey. And to be clear, again, I call it, it's like, it doesn't get done without great people. And so I think everybody's like, I want to be an entrepreneur founder. It's like, holy smokes. No, that's not the case. Like you need, I think about just that have a positive impact on the world. We need great people at these companies. SpaceX doesn't exist because of Elon Musk, and just Elon Musk and just Gwynne Shotwell. Like there's an incredible amount of people that are making that exist. The SEAL teams don't exist just because of SEAL Team 6. Like there's 10x support for every Navy SEAL there is. And it is, you just need so many people, that will, go along with you on that mission, take the punches in the face as you're continuing that journey. It's, And like, I couldn't be more thankful for our team. Like, that's what matters most, is like the team at the end of the day. And I live to serve our team. I tell them that day one, it's like, I want to see them all wildly successful. And I hope that's at Shield AI for a very, very, very long time, because we're making a huge investment into those people. But that's just how I think about it. It's about the team. It's not about any individual.
Thank you, Brandon. We need more people like you who crazy enough to be both a Navy SEAL as well as a founder of a multi-billion-dollar company. So why don't we open it up for questions?
Yeah. Going back to 2015 and your hypothesis about what products would be interesting and what customers and why, curious how many of those hypotheses actually played out, and were there any crazy like opposing solutions or competitors there?
It's like all of them have played out, which is not to say like it's like super obvious stuff though, right? I asked so there's not like, a lot of people were talking about it, but it's actually like operationalizing it. And, then certain things have happened in the world, like Russia, Ukraine, that has like supercharged that. But I asked myself in 2035, what does the role of AI play in the military? And I asked myself, should it be powering, commanding, maneuvering every single military asset that we have? And the answer is like to include our most exquisite fighter jets. And I was like, you know what? The answer is yes. Which is like, again, there are a couple other people at the time who were talking about this. Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work had framed an entire, published a strategy on it called the third offset strategy, right? And it simply came from the observation that AI could outperform humans at, everything that it's been trained to do up into that time, could now be applied to edge level systems, because the compute is now powerful enough, the sensors are now good enough and cheap enough. And so that means you can have lots of AI systems on the battlefield. And that was like, but that's why that again, just a couple of observations, and I wasn't the only person to make them, but then it's like, what else has to happen during that journey? Like, how do you get there? Great. Yeah, it's super easy to say AI should be piloting every single fighter aircraft in our inventory. But that's cool. Brandon, you're a nobody. Ryan, you're a nobody really also, right? And so how do you go from being nobodies with no money, no capital to AI should be piloting everything? And that's kind of like, that's where the hard work comes into play. But those hypotheses, have played true. And the only other thing I'll say about that, right? It's like, it's super easy to make predictions, right? The hard work comes in actually like the execution and making things happen. And whether that's a prediction about, AI should power everything, super easy to make that prediction. Very low meaning if like that prediction for me like becomes wrong, it's like you're wrong. It's like, and I think it's actually important to remember as an entrepreneur also, and also how I think about, the world too. It is so easy to say, that's a dumb idea, that company's going to fail, right? Because 99% of them do. And so you're not some genius when you predict a company is going to fail. It's like, that's, I think the best investors, ask, it's like, all companies fail. So how do you find the ones that are going to succeed? And that's the hard thing. But you hear that a lot, and you guys will hear it, you'll just hear that in your career where people say, oh, that's a dumb idea, that company's going to fail. It's like, yeah, that's great. That doesn't mean you're smart. Like, all companies fail, right? It's kind of like, you should be right most of the time if that's your mentality. It's like, well, tell me why it would succeed is kind of like the question I would ask.
Good evening, first of all. Thank you for being here. There's obviously a lot of innovation happening in the drone space because of Replicator and a whole bunch of other stuff. Are there any aspects of defense innovation that you wish more people were going after and maybe not going after, maybe all in the same space? That's not being looked at enough right now that you wish people would focus on more?
Yeah. If I could wave a wand, I would make all of you work for the U.S. government under policy and change policy, acquisition policy, and regulate. Well, not regulation, really just policy. Like, the fundamental challenge in the defense system is there's this system where, like, I'm a first principles guy. I'm an engineer, so I'm always asking myself, why? It's like, why can't they buy this? Why are they moving so slow? Why don't they have money? And then you're like, okay, why don't they have money? Where's all the money coming from? It's people who say it's not a contracts problem whatsoever. The fundamental problem of the U.S. Acquisition system, the U.S. military, like why we can't innovate, why we're so slow, in my opinion, and there are lots of other problems, but if I could fix one problem, it would go from a requirements-based system to a acquisition system to a problems-based acquisition system. And so it's the old saying, if I asked Henry Ford, if Henry Ford asked the customers what they wanted, they'd say, we want faster horses. And so you have everybody in the military demanding faster horses versus, right, tell me what your problem is and I'll come up with a solution for it, right? That's where entrepreneurs come into play. And so when I say like that's the challenge of it all, it's like, look, that's a really, really, really hard thing to solve, like policy problems in the defense space or like policy problems in government. And I tell every single customer, every single government person that I run into, it's like, look, I make no mistake, like that's a very hard problem, and I can empathize with solving that problem. But if we are not solving that problem, we will, like, no amount of Band-Aids are going to fix the situation. You have to solve the root cause of the problem, or you're truly not going to make progress. It's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be institutionalized. And so I think about solving that, acquisition policy problem first and foremost. And I wish more people were doing it, even though it's ridiculously hard to do.
Quick follow-up on that.
Yeah.
Is that simply at the defense? Is that simply the Department of Defense, or is that like a congressional?
No, it requires Congress. It requires defense. It requires a lot of people. One of the challenges is like those people have never faced the problem before, and so if you've never faced I work on this problem every single day. Like, how can I get a capability that the warfighter wants into the warfighter's hands? Oh, now it's like an acquisition problem. Those like the people in the acquisition system have never had to face that problem. Right? Or like very few understand what it's like on the other side in terms of like facing that problem. Because you think about the number of companies, right? In the past, like before Shield AI and Anduril, it was SpaceX and Palantir. So it's like not really a problem if it comes around every 20 years type thing. So.
Thank you for your time and wisdom. On the topic of problems and hypotheses, during your early fundraising rounds, how did you frame those hypotheses as problem statements?
Very directly is kind of like, look, it's it's right. You like every VC pitch deck's like problem solution, right? And there's, I think, a logical connect there. And so that problem kind of evolves over time. But if you look at one of the challenges was like there are so many problems that this technology solves. It's like focus on like the right value proposition. You'd have some investors like, oh, AI pilots, like there's a pilot shortage. You're like, yes, that's true too. It solves that problem. But it's getting people to focus on, what is going to move the needle the most for the market in terms of, how do I think about problem solution and what to focus on. But I say that like move the needle the most. And if I had to adjust that, it's like what's also going to resonate with that person at the end of the day too, which would necessarily, outside of like the defense market, it would be like, oh, what's going to move the needle the most for the market?
I'm wondering sort of if you can tell any stories or share any insights into how you deal with like institutional resistance coming from some of your DoD customers. So for the example of like the Alpha Dogfight competition, sort of demonstrating that AI fighter pilots are going to outperform humans, but you have a lot of this like verbiage coming out of DoD about like sort of clinging to like human machine teaming as like a reason to keep a human in a plane. Any thoughts on that?
I just think results speak for themselves. That's the fastest way to win people over in terms of like your naysayers and your laggards. And so you can try to convince them, or you can just show them and prove the naysayers wrong. And it's annoying because it's like, they're at where the puck is versus where the puck is going. And I'm not pointing to like any community in the military. I'm just saying like writ large, like any naysayer is like, they're just like where the puck is versus where it's going. And no matter like how much data there is or like evidence there is, sometimes those people just like don't acknowledge that. And like I wouldn't spend a lot of time on those people. It's like win the champions, build build the products, deploy the products. That's what and whether those people come along or not is it doesn't matter, right? It's like to the point of like, it's really easy to predict failure. It's like those people, oh, this will never happen, or this will never happen. It's like, I'm not going to spend, if that's your belief, that's fine. I could, it's like, I will just show you. It's kind of how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Brandon, last question. What's your vision for Shield AI in 5 years?
5 years? Okay, it's just, to me, what matters most is accomplishing the mission and the mission at increasing levels of scale. And so to me, that is in 5 years, thousands, tens of thousands of AI pilots flying aircraft, helping achieve the mission of protecting service members and civilians with artificially intelligent systems. Yeah.
Good answer. Thank you again.
Cool. Thank you.